CHAPTER IV of Windsor Castle, Book 3 This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Windsor Castle, Book 3, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Chapter 4 Containing the history of the castle from the reign of Charles II to that of George III, with a few particulars concerning the parks and forest. Windsor Castle. On the Restoration the castle resumed its splendor, and presented a striking contrast to the previous gloomy period. The terrace, with its festive groups, resembled a picture by Watteau. The courts resounded with laughter, and the velvet sod of the home park was as often pressed by the foot of frolic beauty as by that of tripping deer. 17 state apartments were erected by Sir Christopher Wren, under the direction of Sir John Denham. The ceilings were painted by Verrio, and the walls decorated with exquisite carvings by Grinling Gibbons. A grand staircase was added at the same time. Most of the chambers were hung with tapestry, and all adorned with pictures and costly furniture. The addition made to the castle by Charles was part of the north front, then called the Star Building, from the star of the Order of the Garter worked in colours in the front of it, but now denominated the Stuart Building, extending eastward along the terrace from Henry VII's building 170 feet. In 1676 the ditch was filled up, and the terrace carried along the south and east fronts of the castle. Meanwhile the original character of the castle was completely destroyed and Italianized. The beautiful and picturesque irregularities of the walls were removed, the towers shaved off, the windows transformed into commonplace circular-headed apertures. And so the castle remained for more than a century. Edward III's Tower, indifferently called the Earl Marshal's Tower and the Devil Tower, and used as a place of confinement for state prisoners, was now allotted to the Maids of Honour. It was intended by Charles to erect a monument in honour of his martyred father on the site of the tomb house, which he proposed to remove, and £70,000 were voted by Parliament for this purpose. The design, however, was abandoned under the plea that the body could not be found, though it was perfectly well known where it lay. The real motive, probably, was that Charles had already spent the money. In 1680 an equestrian statue of Charles II, executed by Strada, at the expense of Tobias Rustat, formerly housekeeper at Hampton Court, was placed in the centre of the upper ward. It now stands at the lower end of the same court. The sculptures on the pedestal were designed by Grinling Gibbons, and Horace Walpole pleasantly declared that the statue had no other merit than to attract attention to them. In old times a road, forming a narrow irregular avenue, ran through the woods from the foot of the castle to Snow Hill, but this road having been neglected during a long series of years, the branches of the trees and underwood had so much encroached upon it as to render it wholly impassable. A grand avenue, 240 feet wide, was planned by Charles in its place, and the magnificent approach called the Long Walk laid out and planted. The only material incident connected with the castle during the reign of James II has already been related. Windsor was not so much favoured as Hampton Court by William III, though he contemplated alterations within it during the latter part of his life which it may be matter of rejoicing were never accomplished. Queen Anne's operations were chiefly directed towards the parks, in improving which nearly £40,000 were expended. In 1707 the extensive avenue running almost parallel with the Long Walk, and called the "Queen's Walk," was planted by her; and 3 years afterwards a carriage road was formed through the Long Walk. A garden was also planted on the north side of the castle. In this reign Sir James Thornhill commenced painting Charles II.'s staircase with designs from Ovid's Metamorphoses, but did not complete his task till after the accession of George I. This staircase was removed in 1800, to make way for the present Gothic entrance erected by the elder Wyat. The first two monarchs of the House of Hanover rarely used Windsor as a residence, preferring Hampton Court and Kensington; and even George III. did not actually live in the castle, but in the Queen's Lodge, a large detached building, with no pretension to architectural beauty, which he himself erected opposite the south terrace, at a cost of nearly £44,000. With most praiseworthy zeal, and almost entirely at his own expense, this monarch undertook the restoration of St. George's Chapel. The work was commenced in 1787, occupied 3 years, and was executed by Mr. Emlyn, a local architect. The whole building was repaved, a new altar screen and organ added, and the carving restored. In 1796 Mr. James Wyat was appointed Surveyor General of the royal buildings, and effected many internal arrangements. Externally he restored Wren's round-headed windows to their original form, and at the same time Gothicised a large portion of the north and south sides of the upper ward. Before proceeding further, a word must be said about the parks. The Home Park, which lies on the east and north sides of the castle, is about 4 miles in circumference, and was enlarged and enclosed with a brick wall by William III. On the east, and nearly on the site of the present sunk garden, a bowling green was laid out by Charles II. Below, on the north, were Queen Anne's gardens, since whose time the declivity of the hill has been planted with forest trees. At the east angle of the north terrace are the beautiful slopes, with a path skirting the north side of the Home Park and leading through charming plantations in the direction of the Royal Farm and Dairy, the Ranger's Lodge, and the kennel for the Queen's harriers. This park contains many noble trees; and the grove of elms in the southeast, near the spot where the scathed oak assigned to Herne stands, is traditionally asserted to have been a favourite walk of Queen Elizabeth. It still retains her name. The great park is approached by the magnificent avenue called the Long Walk, laid out, as has been stated, by Charles II., and extending to the foot of Snow Hill, the summit of which is crowned by the colossal equestrian statue of George III., by Westmacott. Not far from this point stands Cumberland Lodge, which derives its name from William, Duke of Cumberland, to whom it was granted in 1744. According to Norden's survey, in 1607, this park contained 3050 acres; but when surveyed by George III. it was found to consist of 3800 acres, of which 200 were covered with water. At that time the park was overgrown with ferns and rushes, and abounded in bogs and swamps, which in many places were dangerous and almost impassable. It contained about 3000 head of deer in bad condition. The park has since been thoroughly drained, smoothed, and new planted in parts; and 2 farms have been introduced upon it, under the direction of Mr. Kent, at which the Flemish and Norfolk modes of husbandry have been successfully practised. Boasting every variety of forest scenery, and commanding from its knolls and acclivities magnificent views of the castle. The great park is traversed, in all directions, by green drives threading its long vistas, or crossing its open glades, laid out by George the Fourth. Amid the groves at the back of Spring Hill, in a charmingly sequestered situation, stands a small private chapel, built in the Gothic style, and which was used as a place of devotion by George the Fourth during the progress of the improvements at the castle, and is sometimes attended by the present queen. Not the least of the attractions of the park is Virginia Water, with its bright and beautiful expanse, its cincture of green banks, soft and smooth as velvet, its screen of noble woods, its Chinese fishing temple, its frigates, its ruins, its cascade, cave, and druidical temple, its obelisk and bridges, with numberless beauties besides, which it would be superfluous to describe here. This artificial mere covers pretty nearly the same surface of ground as that occupied by the great lake of olden times. Windsor Forest once comprehended a circumference of 120 miles, and comprised part of Buckinghamshire, a considerable portion of Surrey, and the whole southeast side of Berkshire, as far as Hungerford. On the Surrey side it included Cobham and Chertsey, and extended along the side of the Wey, which marked its limits as far as Guildford. In the reign of James I., when it was surveyed by Norden, its circuit was estimated at 77 miles and a half, exclusive of the liberties extending into Buckinghamshire. There were 15 walks within it, each under the charge of a head keeper, and the whole contained upwards of 3,000 head of deer. It is now almost wholly enclosed. Chapter 5